Hey, what's going on, YouTube? This is going to be the first video in a series I'm doing pertaining to the more mysterious and puzzling topics of the Bible. Before I start, I just want to apologize for the filming quality. I just record these on the fly. I may look into getting some new equipment, but we'll just have to see. Okay. In this video, I'll be talking about the figure known as Melchizedek in the Hebrew scriptures. There seems to be a lot of interpretations floating around out there. We are first introduced to Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14, where he encounters Abram, who we later know becomes known as Abraham. In Genesis chapter 14, we are told that Chedorlaomer and a host of other kings make war with and defeat the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. They plundered goods and they took prisoners. We can see this in Genesis chapter 14, verse 10 to 12. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and their victuals, and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So following that, we are told that an escapee makes his way back to Abram and explains what happened. In turn, Abram, who was very wealthy, he assembles an army of servants and members of his house and pursues Chedorlaomer into Dan. Abraham defeats Chedorlaomer, brings back the goods, the persons, and then is met by Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14, verse 18 to 20. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him, and he said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all. So now that we set the stage, let's get into my interpretation of who this Melchizedek dude is and what his deal was. So we're going to be looking primarily into Genesis chapter 14, verse 18. I'll break down this verse and share my opinions and thoughts. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comment section. I'd love to hear other opinions. I'm always open for that. I'm not saying mine's the more correct, but I just enjoy interpreting these old passages. So verse 18 tells us three important pieces of information. It tells us that Melchizedek was a priest of the Most High God. It also calls him the king of Salem, and he makes use of bread and wine. First and foremost, let's look deeper into the phrase priest of the Most High God and the significance of that. As you may know, priests of Yahweh are supposed to be the descendants of Aaron. However, Melchizedek is a Gentile. Paul also states this in Hebrews, that the order of Melchizedek is superior to that of Aaron, and referring to Jesus as being in the Melchizedek order. This further illustrates that the God being spoken of by Melchizedek is a God of all peoples, not just like a national deity or a racial deity of the Jews or any other particular race for that matter. An important function of a priesthood is to instruct the people in the ways of God. I believe the order of Melchizedek and his followers, were to go forth to all the surrounding nations proclaiming this Most High God, and also introduce the concepts of monotheism and the futility of blood sacrifices to appease a wrathful God. In doing so, it paves the way for Jesus' bestowal on earth by creating the necessary conditions in the minds of men. I believe these traces of these Melchizedek teachings can also be found in the early records of other major religions. However, these teachings became incredibly distorted over time. The Jews best preserved these original teachings, although they too became distorted, especially during the Babylonian captivity. Nevertheless, the Jews' concept of God made them the best people group for the Son of God to incarnate in. Some of these Melchizedek teachings I have listed as the Most High God, brotherhood of man, monotheism, futility of blood sacrifices, and kind of a foreshadowing of God's Son. But again, I do not believe that Melchizedek is, in fact, some pre-incarnate form of Jesus. But we'll get into that near the end. So Melchizedek is also referred to as the King of Salem. Salem evolved into the whole city, or the holy city of Jerusalem. I'm under the impression that this was the center of these Melchizedek teachings and the order of Melchizedek, kind of like the base of operations where they would go out and spread their teachings across the lands. Let's talk quickly about the use of bread and wine. This is where a lot of people automatically think, okay, it's Jesus. Just because he has, the bread and wine in the New Testament and all that. But I think the reasoning behind the bread and wine is twofold. One, obviously it is prophetic because it foreshadows Jesus. But again, Melchizedek is not a pre-incarnate Jesus, in my opinion. Paul makes it clear in Hebrews when he says Jesus is forever a priest in the order of Melchizedek. But that's not to say that Jesus is inferior to Melchizedek. The other reason the bread and wine is significant I believe it was used in place of blood sacrifice as more of a meal of thanksgiving. I believe one of Melchizedek's main aims was to reveal the futility of barbarous blood sacrifices to appease God. However, I believe early men had trouble conceptualizing getting something for what seems to be nothing, like something just based pure on faith. And we can see this when Abram resorts back to animal sacrifice in Genesis. Genesis, I think it's chapter 15, where he starts hacking animals into pieces. Not the birds, though. The birds are okay. Okay, so in summary, I believe Melchizedek was a heavenly personality sent by God to incarnate on earth and spread the teachings of monotheism under a loving, fatherly God. I believe Melchizedek preached about the arrival of the Son of God and to kickstart kind of the social evolution of monotheism out of the ideas of turning people away from polytheism and blood sacrifices. We can further see the evolution of the concept of God in the minds of the early Hebrews when we compare kind of the crude concepts of God in the earlier scriptures to the high point of the book of Isaiah. Once humanity reached these theological understandings, I believe conditions were ripe for the Son of God to incarnate and complete the revelation of the character of God, meaning strictly submitting his own will to the will of the Father. And I don't think this could have. Well, I think Melchizedek played an integral role in paving that way. So that's all I have for my opinion of Melchizedek and what may have been his role. If you guys want to agree, disagree, feel free, comment. I'm going to be back with another video. I have a couple topics that I want to look into. If you guys have any topics that you would like me to talk about, just post a comment. And thanks for watching. God bless.